This edition of Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose is sponsored by Riverbed Technology. On this edition of Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose, a cry for help turns into a rallying cry for CX. The fix is in for employee rough spots across government and the VA's roadmap to smoothing the path for veterans. Welcome to Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose. The Air Force is about a year and a half out from the Fix Our Computers LinkedIn post that sparked a rethinking of internal customer experience in the service. But it wasn't the beginning of the service's customer experience journey. Colt Whittall is Chief Experience Officer at the Air Force and Space Force. Welcome, Colt. It's great to have you on the program. What was your sense at the time of Fix Our Computers, where you were customer experience-wise across the Air Force and Space Force?
Well, we knew we had an issue. That was clear, and my role was created 4 years ago because we knew we had an issue. And I think that post, it galvanized it, it highlighted, which was good. It was a good thing, it was helpful. And fortunately, we had a plan, and we were already executing that plan. And at the point that that came out, we were actually about at the point where we were starting to turn the numbers and get where we needed to go. So in this particular case, it was helpful.
Regarding turning the numbers, what were the numbers that you saw then that you wanted to turn, and what are the numbers now that you track to understand where you are and where you want to go?
So when I first came into this role, we were not measuring user experience or customer experience to any significant extent, and certainly not in a program way at the enterprise level. So that was the first thing we focused on. And one of the very first things we did is we worked with the Air Force Survey Office. They typically do big research studies, on things like, inclusion, sexual harassment, things like that. And we went to them and said, hey, can we use your platform to send out a regular monthly survey to a small percentage of airmen and ask them 3 simple questions about their experience with IT and using their computers? And so we started tracking that metric, and we've been tracking it ever since, and we pay very close attention to that. And so in 2020, we were upside down, dissatisfied to satisfied by about 5 percentage points. Today, we have about 2x more satisfied than dissatisfied. That is a major turnaround any way you look at it. So that's one metric. That's kind of my top line metric that I care about most. And the way that we ask the question is very mission-centric. And then there's other metrics too, right? We have in-the-weeds metrics that are measuring the performance of the systems and the software right on the individual airman's computer. And we pay close attention to that too. And these things are very correlated, the user sat and the actual performance from the airman perspective.
How much of what goes into that satisfied, dissatisfied number is simply whether my stuff works, and how much of it is more, maybe softer than that to determine?
Well, it's both. But, as I always say, everyone's favorite search engine, if it took 10 seconds to return a search, you would hate it. Mm-hmm. No matter how good the results are, you would still hate it. Things have to perform. That's kind of the baseline. It has to perform, it has to be stable, it has to perform and be resilient under any wide variety of conditions on all of our networks. And we have to be able to measure that and be accountable for that. And so, so there's that. Now, things also need to be designed well so that they're simple to use and don't require a lot of extra training and things like that, right? To take friction out of our work. That's very, very important. But the first thing we needed to resolve were these fix my computer performance kind of issues. And so, it's both. Yeah,
so and the reason that I ask that is because when I read the post and then when I went back and read it again this week to prepare to talk to you, a lot of what was going on there was related to the stuff, the hardware and the software.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that for CX success, that's not all there is to it. Is that a fair read on my part?
That is absolutely a fair read. And so we now have ways of measuring both. First priority was performance, response times, resilience, those things, right? And then, but we are now adding in measurements that tell us how well we're doing in terms of usability of key applications. And performance of specific features within applications. So we're now getting that kind of data as well. I was actually in a briefing this morning where I was sharing some of that with a senior leader.
One of the things that I think is fascinating about this is the mindset that you and your colleagues are taking. You said this recently regarding customer experience. It's a serious issue. It's a mission-affecting issue. It's also, one could argue, that it could eventually become a recruiting or even a readiness issue or a retention issue. That's well outside the scope of an IT operation.
Absolutely. But if you ask airmen, what are your challenges, right? What are you dealing with? And you'll hear a wide variety of things, and we need to be responsive to those. And for a lot of them, IT comes up on the list. And frankly, and I mean, I can go into this more depth if you'd like, but the single biggest factor in IT is just having an up-to-date computer that meets our latest or close to the latest computing standards.
And that's one of the things that jumped out at me originally, because when Michael Kinane made that post, I think he said he looked up, he Googled the computer he was using, and it cost $108. Would you say, I think, and I'm paraphrasing, would you send somebody to war with a computer that costs $108? And of course everybody would answer no, that sounds silly. But the data piece of this is striking though, because that's not the only data point. How are you using data to continue to improve not just that dissatisfied number that you talked about, but all of the other aspects that you've described?
Well, great question. So a lot of it is about tracking it over time. So being able to take a snapshot, which we have more than a snapshot, we're tracking these numbers all the time. But being able to know for each base how a particular piece of software, so let's just take Outlook, right? Email client. What is the response time of that software for certain features of the software, like opening up an email? Just track that over time. Track it for every base. Is it moving up? Is it moving down? Is it getting better, getting worse? And today, for the vast majority of bases, that particular metric is significantly better than it was whenever we started measuring it about 2 years ago. So that's important. It says we're doing the right things. Well, why did it get better, right? And we know attribution of these things is not always one for one. You know what I mean? It's a little unclear, but we think we know. A big part of it is, starting about 3 years ago, we more than doubled the number of new PCs that we're deploying, right? Part of that was response to COVID, but it took a while to get those in the field. So more than double the number of PCs we're deploying, so that's making a big difference. So we're getting a lot of the old ones out of there. Still have too many old ones, but getting a lot of the old ones out of there. We're updating endpoint security. We've made a lot of changes already to endpoint security because that was kind of just churning too much. And another big one is the management of the software image itself. So we have converted to something we call cloud device management. Essentially, from the cloud, we push out all the software updates and keep everything in sync and up to date. And just having the up-to-date version of the operating system and all the various patch levels and of the the office automation applications, everything, just having all of that stuff up to date, pushed out from the cloud on every device, has a massive improvement in user experience.
That you kind of anticipated where I wanted to go next, which is what are the technology pieces that are allowing you to do this, and what are the technology pieces that will allow you to continue the momentum maybe that you're not using now, or not using as much of as you can potentially in the future?
Well, I think, it's not necessarily a technology piece. It's a new contract vehicle and a way of acquiring IT. We have a program called ITAS, and so we experimented with ITAS on 9 bases. I have an ITAS computer. I switched over to it about 1.5 years ago. Totally different way of deploying IT into the field. My computer was shipped to me at my home in Atlanta, showed up in a box on my doorstep. I go in, I boot it up. I've been using it ever since, and it works as well on my desk in Atlanta. I have my personal MacBook and an external monitor, and I have my ITAS computer and an external monitor. In terms of performance and day-to-day use, they are exactly the same. There's a few more security features on my ITAS computer, as you would imagine, right? I have to put in my CAC and a PIN and all those things, right? But other than that, they work about the same. And so it's a different way, different model of acquiring the IT, and it's getting us results that are fantastic. The user satisfaction with those devices is about double what it is the rest.
You have about 30 seconds left, Colt. What do you look at now to try to maintain the momentum that you've gained 1 year, 2 years, 5 years in the future?
I think it is about this method of kind of data-driven IT. I call it precision-guided tech refresh. I think it's getting that adopted and part of the culture. where instead of just saying we're going to refresh all the computers, we say, wait a minute, based on the outcomes we're delivering and the results we're measuring, go do tech refresh there. Once we get to that kind of culture, I think we're going to be in great shape.
Colt, Whittall, thanks very much for joining me. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
You can read more about customer experience in the Air Force at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the fix is in for employee rough spots across government. Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment.
For public sector organizations in today's hybrid world, every click can make a difference. Mission success depends on flawless, secure execution. And when response time is everything, milliseconds matter. Now you can harness full fidelity data to surface actionable insights, connect the dots, eliminate blind spots, and enable end-to-end visibility. That's the power of unified observability from Alluvio by Riverbed.
Welcome back to Military's Fix Our Computers Problems, an example of the customer experience challenges agencies are working on, but it's only one type of problem agencies have to deal with, CX-wise. Marlin McFate's Public Sector Chief Technology Officer for Riverbed. Marlin, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. How does what Colt talked about a few minutes ago mesh with what you're seeing as you talk to customers across government about CX?
It's an interesting question. I'm going to answer that kind of in two different ways, right? What Colt was really talking about was the things that need to be done to improve UX and the way that his organization is going about that. But what I also see is an organization, or organizations, that really haven't started going down that road. They're still kind of stuck doing things more in the old way of doing things. You know, Riverbed's basically been working in some way, shape, or form in the performance realm or end user performance realm for, let's call it, 2 decades. And the creation of the Chief Experience Officer that we've seen happen in roughly about 4 out of 10 government agencies, and that's including both the military side and also the civilian side. Really only 4 and 10. And those are much needed positions, and they're kind of an acknowledgement that there has been a problem and that we've been going about it kind of in the wrong way. And so when I do find organizations that haven't started down that path, I find that they try to utilize data, not what Colt was talking about, which are much more finite and more exact, specific data on user experience, and not just basing things off of how many tickets have we had this month, or what are the the customers or the end users complaining about. Actually using much more just better data sets to determine whether or not there's actually a problem and what that problem is. So I see that side. But then I also see, when we go to organizations that are utilizing the customer experience and they're putting the effort behind that, them utilizing the data sets that Colt was talking about.
Yeah,
and having a lot more success, by the way.
What are the organizations that are collecting the right data doing to collect it, and what are they doing with it once they have it?
Well, let's take a step back. The data that they have in the past, that more adjacent data, network data or flow data or packet data or application-specific data, tickets, all the kind of things, that's still important, but then combining that with something like an Alluvio Eternity, right, which is looking more at really what is the experience on that end person's computer. Colt had mentioned Outlook, for example. Well, how fast does it send mail? How fast is it receiving mail? How fast is it downloading transactions? How fast am I getting my address book? Those types of things. But actually measuring right down to milliseconds how long those processes take, as opposed to taking a look at something like network data and saying, well, I see the connection between the end user and, say, the email server, and the response time is X, and now trying to ascertain, well, it looks like the end user should be having a good experience in this particular instance. What we would find is when looking at that data, but then actually working with the end user, you still find that they're saying, no, my experience is not actually that good. So ascertaining end user data, it just wasn't working. So Riverbed developed the technology to actually look at the end user's experience and how long every single minute action on that endpoint device actually takes.
You talked about the difference between organizations that have somebody that owns CX and UX versus the organizations in government that don't. For the organizations that do have somebody, that 4 in 10 that you talked about, what are the pain points that those organizations still tell you they need help with?
Good question. It's far less, to be quite honest with you. This is really more of a path or a journey, right? So we're not going to solve all end user experience issues, overnight, right? And not only that, it's not that, as the future, when we bring in new applications or put out new endpoint devices or expand the user base to a larger number of end users, we're not going to find that we continually run into end user problems. So this is more of a journey than, there's really not a destination here. But for those organizations that are utilizing a chief experience officer, some of the things that data showed that was quite interesting was, one, they're using different data sets. They're having more success in actually finding out what the root cause of the end user problem is. And then another one was, we see that they have to take a level 1 ticket. When somebody calls in, they have a complaint. Elevating that to a higher level tech, that happens far less. And the reason why that's important is the earlier in that chain that you can solve the end user's problem is, one, you're eliminating a lot of time to, basically mean time to resolution, but you're also not necessarily tying up those more expensive resources. You've shifted left and you're able to solve things at level 1, level 2, and not everything has to make it to a 3 or a 4. And now those employees are left to be able to do the more important things that we want to do, like the new design, modernization projects. That before, they were kind of being pulled back to solve problems that probably should have been solved at a lower level. And the tools allow them to do that because it's just better insight, better data.
Marlin, thanks very much for joining me. It's great to have you on the program.
Thank you so much.
You can read more about what Marlin talked about at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the VA's roadmap for smoothing the path for veterans, when Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment.
For public sector organizations in today's hybrid world, every click can make a difference. Mission success depends on flawless, secure execution. And when response time is everything, milliseconds matter. Now you can harness full fidelity data to surface actionable insights, connect the dots, eliminate blind spots, and enable end-to-end visibility. That's the power of unified observability from Alluvio by Riverbed.
Welcome back. The Department of Veterans Affairs is in the 7th year of what it calls the VA Way. The agency says the VA Way is, quote, the department's customer experience formula that connects all VA employees to our I Care values. Nathan Sanfilippo is Executive Director for Multi-Channel Technology in the Veterans Experience Office at the VA. Nathan, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. What are the major building blocks, the major rocks that VA is working on customer experience-wise today?
Yeah, veterans experience at the VA has been, to your point, over the past 7 years to a decade, really at the forefront of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to transform as an organization. We're really looking at putting the veteran at the center of everything that we do. The VA exists to provide health care and benefits to veterans. There's really no other purpose, right? So really embedding that sort of customer experience and veteran experience knowledge at the center and looking at everything that the VA provides through the eyes of the veterans and their families, caregivers, and survivors is really what we're trying to do. And we measure that using metrics around trust. And we've been measuring veterans' trust in the VA since 2015. And have been tracking since then to see how the actions that we're doing are impacting growing trust amongst veterans. There's a whole swath of activities that we're undertaking. Really, it's an end-to-end journey. We're heavily focused on transition and the transition from active service military to veteran status, right, and making for a better transition process. not only then, of course, there are many veterans who, through things like the PACT Act, which is a huge, new piece of legislation that's just passing its 1-year anniversary this week, looking at new veterans coming into VA for the first time, whether they be from the Vietnam era and beyond. The PACT Act really expanding eligibility of benefits to them. So a huge piece of what we're doing is looking at new folks coming through the door, experiencing VA for the first time. Sort of the next piece is then how do we help them experience a one VA, breaking down the silos between all of the different VA services and benefits, right? There's VA healthcare, which is a huge piece of what we do. There's VA education benefits, home loans, disability compensation, all of those different things. Of course, internally, we're structured. We have organizational silos. We have, but we shouldn't be asking veterans to figure out how to navigate VA. It should be one experience. I'm interacting with the VA, and whether it's for a GI Bill benefit or for healthcare, it should look and feel the same, be seamless across, whether you're calling to a contact center, whether you're going into the hospital, whether you're interacting on va.gov. How are we creating a seamless experience across all of those services? So that's where we're really trying to evolve what we do. And then, kind of the more vision as far as where we're trying to go, that's a huge priority for our team in the Veterans Experience offices. How do we stop being so reactive and start being more proactive, right? We have so much data that we know about veterans from their time in the military. A lot of times we have enough information to know a veteran is eligible for a benefit, but under the current paradigm, they have to come to us and apply for that benefit. Mm-hmm. Why can't we be more proactive and say, hey, you've earned this benefit, you are eligible, let us know and we'll start providing it to you, right? And so changing that paradigm to be more proactive and personalized to veterans as individuals is really where we're trying to go as an organization.
What's the gap between where you are today and getting to that vision that you just outlined? Is it technology? Is it like regulatory or legal or policy? Or is it something else? Is it some combination of those things?
I think it's a little bit of everything. Technology is getting to the point where it's, at least in my view, it's no longer an impediment. 5-10 years ago, certainly there were some limitations of what you could do with legacy systems. Now it seems like you can stitch just about anything together, mm-hmm. new and old. There's ways around that. In many cases, it's the human element. Do we have the people in place to deliver those new and advanced services? Do we have the processes in place? How do we make those seamless handoffs between somebody that's maybe taking a call, answering questions about a GI Bill benefit, but then that person wants to talk about their pharmacy benefits, right? How do we make that a seamless transition from one VA expert to another so that it's not, here's a different phone number for a different, start your journey all over again and call this new contact center.
Yeah,
right?
So you say that, I think, as a rhetorical question, and I'll ask it as an actual question. How do you take that in an organization like VA that, as you said, has different parts of an organization that are not necessarily connected together for other reasons, and connect them together for that veterans experience reason?
Yeah, a big core of what we're trying to do to enable that is through data sharing, right? And each of those silos has been collecting information about their customers, their veterans that they serve. Healthcare is collecting information about those veterans. Some of it is universal information, right? We're obviously not sharing private healthcare information with the education, services representative, right? But everything about that veteran or family member as a customer of VA that is universal can and should be shared, and helps us to make more seamless transitions. So a lot of it is sort of back-end data integration, breaking down silos, and a lot of it is, of course, to your point, internal rules, regulations, processes about what's an authoritative data source, who owns the data, who's maybe giving up institutional control over some bit of data for the betterment of the enterprise. Those are some of the things we're really wrestling with. And the PACT Act has been a huge forcing function with respect to getting all of us in a room talking together about how do we, it's really the first time we've taken one of these huge pieces of legislation that has impacted the VA and started with it implementing it from a veteran's perspective, right? And not saying, let's set up, this service here and this service there, saying, well, as a new veteran, newly eligible to VA benefits, what do we want them to experience coming in the door for the first time? And yeah, then maybe they're getting disability compensation for the first time. Oh, and that qualifies them for health care, and how do we make it a good first experience?
How does that change the way that you built the system by which you intake these folks and deliver the benefits that they've earned under the PACT Act versus the system that is kind of a legacy system, I guess, the way it's been done before?
Yeah, well, certainly, you know, the PACT Act expanded benefits to so many millions of more veterans, but fundamentally didn't change anything that we do, right? And that's really the way that we're looking at it. It's a huge expansion and a huge opportunity to deliver a better experience, but it's fundamentally not changing our mission or, you know, a PACT doesn't necessarily provide a new benefit, it expands existing benefits. So we're really trying to bake it into our normal processes so that in, you know, 2, 5, 10 years when, you know, the PACT Act is behind us, and all of those sorts of eligibility and enhanced eligibility is just part of our normal process. So we're really trying to, and we're having those conversations now, how do we make this increased sort of VA-wide integration that we're really specifically doing in response to the PACT Act? How do we make that normal business? And a lot of that is building the interrelationships between the different parts of the VA in ways that just we haven't done before.
We have about a minute left, Nathan. How do you interact with, and who do you interact with most across the agency? Who are your customers and who are your partners as you're delivering on this within the organization?
Sure, the Veterans Experience Office, you know, we're really sort of a connector and convener and collaborator. Of course, we provide end-to-end subject matter expertise on, you know, human-centered design research, customer feedback, designing tools, and then helping our medical facilities implement those tools or regional offices. But a lot of that is just through partnerships. So, you know, we work closely with the 3 main VA administrations, the Veterans Health Administration, the Veterans Benefits Administration, National Cemetery Administration. You know, all of those folks, we build those relationships, we work with them. My team in the multi-channel technology team works to advance their tech priorities as far as their sort of business requirements and budget and funding. And all of those things. So, you know, we're really partners and facilitators and, you know, working to improve the outcomes that veterans are receiving from VA.
It's great to have you on the program, Nathan. Thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you.
You can read more about the Veterans Experience Office VA at fedgovtoday.com. Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose is back in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the Fed Gov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, the GovForward FedRAMP Headliner Summit's coming August 23rd. Speakers from GSA, Capitol Hill, and industry will be there. I'll be your MC for the day. You can read more and register at govforward.com. FedGov Today with Francis Rose returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. The Vice Chief of Space Operations, General D.T. Thompson, will be here. Hope you will be too. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks for watching. See you then.